Well, unlike you, who were just told to keep your remarks short, I thought I was only going to make short remarks and I didn't have to give a speech. So I'm not really totally prepared, but I thought I'd maybe just make a few brief comments about the environment. And not only did the main thing that really qualifies me to be in a conversation like this, aside from being a tech journalist for many years, is I wrote a book about Facebook. So I have quite a bit of insight into that company, and it does provide a lens that's interesting for a lot of other things. But with regards to the internet in general, we are at a crisis point right now. I think that's pretty widely agreed, and I would say there are plenty of reasons why. One is simply the pervasiveness that it's acquired in all of our lives, and the sort of universality of its services to all of us, that we become so dependent on it. But unfortunately, it's not only us that have become dependent on it, but it's also the NSA, among others. And that is really one of the main problems, that governments really think that it's their territory. And I think that's the big problem that we have to solve. Not that governments need to do more, but that governments need to do less. So if you look at the basic situation internet governance is in right now, we really exist at a moment where there's a tremendous risk of fragmentation of the internet, where countries all over the world are acting as if the internet belongs to their national government. And one of the great places to observe this is in Turkey, where Erdogan continues to, by whim, decide, okay, no Twitter this week, no YouTube that week, or whatever. And certainly we've seen that same attitude many other places as well. And everybody knows about the Great Firewall of China, but I actually am less worried about China than I am about other countries like Turkey, certainly Russia, and many other countries that are not democratic, where leaders have recognized that the internet is the biggest threat to their power if they're not democratic leaders or despots or dictators. Because ultimately, as we've seen in Arab Spring and elsewhere, that the citizens can do a tremendously good job organizing themselves now in a way that could never happen before. Arab Spring was one of the kind of critical events that I think changed the perception globally of what the internet was all about. And of course, Facebook was intimately involved in that. But I do think there's sort of two big things that have changed the way governments think about the internet. The first one, historically, in chronological terms, was Arab Spring. And then following Arab Spring, the democratic and sort of self-organizing outpouring of citizen activism that occurred in Israel, in Spain, in Russia, in Turkey, those four in particular. Brazil was another one. So those 5 countries each experienced in, maybe 2011, 2012, a tremendous citizen uprising against their government or their current systems. In Brazil, it was against the Olympic planning, and in Turkey, it was against Erdogan, and in Russia, it was against Putin, etc. And in Spain, it was young people protesting the cost of living, and like in Israel, and their feeling of powerlessness and unemployment. And what was the consequence of that? The consequence of that was that in Russia, Putin took over Kontakta and basically kicked out of the country the one truly autonomous social network that existed there. And similar things are happening in every country. So then the second thing chronologically was the Snowden revelations about the NSA. And now we learned that my government, the United States, is, and I'm not representative of it by any means, but they do treat the internet as a cookie jar that they can reach into and take whatever they want anytime. And they're very hypocritical because, from the one hand, the United States, some of you may know, banned the import of technologies from Huawei to be used in infrastructure of the telecommunications system of the United States because, and this was about early 2013, I think, maybe late 2012, I forget when. But the argument was that Huawei's technology, being Chinese, potentially might have backdoors that allowed the Chinese government to steal American information, blah, blah, blah. And then, thanks to Snowden, we discovered that's the reason they worried about that, is that's exactly what we do. We've been installing backdoors into Cisco and IBM and Google and Facebook and all kinds of American, perceived to be American-owned systems. And that's a very, very bad problem that has undermined confidence in the internet. And I think those two things, the citizen outpouring that is evidenced in Arab Spring and the demonstrations in the countries I mentioned on the one hand, and the Snowden revelations on the other hand, basically have made governments around the world aware and put them on notice that the internet is a much more powerful tool than they thought. It's a powerful tool both for their citizens and it's a powerful tool for their enemies. And that means they now think they have to take control of it and basically operate it as if it was a government entity. So right now, the crisis is manifested in the reorganization of ICANN and some other systems, but particularly what ICANN is going through in attempting to create its own autonomy from the US government, which it's been a creature of historically. Even though ICANN has been operated on its own, it's been basically doing so with the permission of the US Department of Commerce, which sort of created it in the 90s, or whenever it was, a long time ago. And ICANN is desperately trying to reposition itself as a non-American organization with a multilateral governance. And they're making progress, but they're not there. And if they don't succeed, this problem is going to get much worse. So basically, that's just a few observations from me, and then I'll sit down and listen to my colleagues, and maybe we can have a discussion about it. So should I go sit? Oh, back then.
Thank you, David Kirkpatrick. Berit Svendsen, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Customer insight is key to good customer experience. I shop most of my clothes in a special store. The owner of the store has good overview of my whole wardrobe and always recommends something that fits to the other clothes I have in my wardrobe. As a customer, I really appreciate to see me, know me approach. This is a mom and pop store, and it's not really scalable. In recent years, large companies have gone a different way. They have been more concerned about scale, standard processes, are sourcing out customer service to India or to machines that don't really know the customers. If you try to call these companies, you are being forwarded to so many different persons. You have to tell your story once and once again, and you get really annoyed of bad customer experience. The large companies have drifted away from the customers and customers' intimacy. In recent years, we have also seen that a new type of companies have come on the scene. The so-called shared economy companies, like Uber, who are doing taxi services, like Airbnb, that are renting out rooms, and toy sharing. These companies have used the disruptions of internet. They are providing all their services on internet. They have a lot of information about their customers. They don't own their own assets. They are renting their assets from people who want to rent assets to them. And they are trusted by young people because they are huge successes in most countries. In the years to come, in 10 years' time, it's expected that the revenues from those types of companies are going to increase by 20 times. It's going to be a huge economy by sharing companies. When this happens, customers are being more and more aware of owning their own data and taking control of the privacy of the data. A study that is done by Telenor Research are saying that telco operators in Europe are rated higher as a trusted company or trusted companies than Facebook and Google. Telenor, we have always taken care of people's information. in a good manner. We know who is calling who is sending text messages to each other, who is surfing on internet, who is visiting Facebook, who is downloading videos from YouTube. And we want to be a leading company in taking care of customers' information to provide better customer experience. At the same time, to provide better customer experience, we need to know more about our customers and use that information when we are providing services. So when customers are calling Telenor, they get recommendations about what type of service they should choose. If there are a person that's only using their fixed phone, they shouldn't be offered a big data package for surfing on the internet. Instead, we have to think about, should we give an offer of a smartphone and let they get a course in learning how to go on internet? So to know the customers will give much better customer experience. And we are working with that in all touch points. And we are using the data about our customers to provide better customer experience. Our vision is to empower societies. We are operating in 13 different countries. We have over 180 million customers. In each country, we are operating according to local law. The new thing with us is that we are going to report publicly interceptions, lawful interceptions, and when we are delivering out communication data to governments in each country. In Norway last year, we delivered out 6,000 times data from our network, who is calling who is sending text messages to who is surfing on Facebook, to the government in Norway. In addition to that, we had 1,431 lawful interceptions in our network, asked by the government. In such a way, citizens in all the countries we are operating can compare the data. What's going on from the government in each country regarding lawful interceptions and getting out information from the different networks. Going forward, there are some huge trends coming. Internet of Things. In 10 years' time, there will be more things on internet than human beings. To have control of privacy and security will be essential. When you can monitor and do everything with the things that are on internet, we need to know what we are doing. And in that way, we think it's very good that we are a trusted company to take care of customer data. And we are ready to take that challenge going forward as well.
Thank you, Berit Svendsen. Eirik Newth, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, that's great. There were many questions today. They were all good, but there were many questions, and that presents us with a problem, because each and every one of them is really complex. So I'm going to focus on one of them, which is, can and should government get a better grip on the internet in order to protect privacy, because privacy is a special concern of mine. My first point was already mentioned by you, which is that this job is already very hard. I mean, the internet we have today is so widespread, it delivers such a huge amount of various services, that it's simply very hard to keep track of it all. And it's impossible for any single government to keep track of everything that everyone is doing all over the internet. And it will get harder with the continued development of the IT business. The Internet of Things the fact that we will surround ourselves with a cloud of small computers in quite a few years' time was mentioned. And another trend is the so-called big data trend, which is all about analyzing the stream of data that comes from all the gadgets that will surround us. Most Norwegians don't think about this, but for instance, in 2020, many of us will be equipped with smart electricity meters. That's actually been made a law by the people over there. And the big difference between the conventional electricity meter, which you read once a year and you send in the data to your electricity company, and the smart meter is that it can read your electricity every minute, for instance. So you have a continuously updated data stream. Electricity, which was one single data point, becomes a stream. Now, for instance, Google has recognized this, so that's why last year they bought a thermostat producer called Nest, because that's a way to when you can monitor electricity consumption. You can also see what's happening inside a house, for instance. You know how many people are inside, what they're doing, and of course, combined with the other data that Google is collecting about us all the time. They are essentially reading our minds because they are always seeing what we're typing. They can get a much better view of what we're doing. They're making our houses transparent, but not in the old way, in the new way. And this is not the only example. In 10 years' time, your car will be a continuous generator of data. Your refrigerator might be, your coffee maker. And if you're like me and use a sort of activity tracker, this is a Fitbit, you're already doing it. I'm delivering a continuous stream of data while I walk here. And it's all ending up in an American database under American law. So, no, I'm not protected by Norwegian law. And my main point is that currently there is little in the political discussion in Norway that actually reflects this. We are faced with yet another textbook case of technology moving faster than the pace of politics. It's happened many times before. This is basically the story of the Industrial Revolution. And what we've learned during the past 200 years is, of course, this is not about rolling over and giving up, but it is about realigning ourselves and getting a healthy sense of priority. So, for instance, regarding privacy, the question today is no longer how to restore the privacy that people of my age, and many of you people young here, you don't know, but when I was young, you could get in a car, drive off, and nobody would know where you were. You could drop off the map. That's no longer possible. It won't be back. That kind of privacy will never be back in our time. So we need to accept that fact from now on, that every one of us will generate an increasing flow of data, and that a lot of that data, regardless of all the good work being done by, for instance, Norwegian corporations, will be accessible to governments, to private corporations, many of them not Norwegian, and also to other people. People monitoring other people is also a big trend. We need to take a closer look at privacy. We need to deconstruct it, if you will, because we've seen privacy as a sort of a single entity. And that's the old view of privacy. And it was very valuable in the old society. But we need to take a reality check, realize that a lot of that is gone now, and decide what elements of privacy are most important to us, what elements really deserve protection, and what elements can we actually let go. In every case, we need to balance this against the possible good that can come from the loss of privacy. Because the point is, ladies and gentlemen, surveillance, for the lack of a better term, can be good. Now, if you use Google or Facebook or a smartphone, you've essentially accepted that argument. You clicked on the terms of use that lets these companies gather sensitive personal data about you and your habits. And as I said, let's Google see what you're thinking at any moment. Let's Facebook deduce a lot about your private life based on the information you give them. And in return, we get valuable and very useful and attractive services. For instance, imagine navigating in the internet without Google. It's free, but you give something in exchange. This is just the beginning. In Canada, just now, there's an insurance company that's developing an app. At the moment, it's just employees who are testing it. And this is based on a smartphone. And the smartphone is essentially full of sensors. This one has 44 sensors. It's an old phone. And the smartphone has software that can monitor the customer's driving habits. Now, what's the point of this? Well, for the insurance company, it is to offer the customers a possible reward. If you drive safely and within the law, you will get lower insurance premiums. There's other companies in the United States who offer you discounts if you are willing to share your Fitbit data. This, in the old view, is an obvious breach of privacy. But on the other hand, in the new view, in the new world, of course, to customers, this could be a great benefit. I mean, everybody wants cheaper car insurance, especially young people. Think about all the 18-year-old boys today who are paying far too much in insurance premiums because most 18-year-olds don't drive very safely. But there are people who drive safely. Why shouldn't they get an insurance premium that actually reflects what they do? Now, why shouldn't society benefit from this? Because, of course, if people drive more safely, if we are able to incentivize people to drive safely and be more healthy, society as a whole will benefit. This has to be balanced against the possible harm. And here we encounter a problem, which is, as I guess I've been researching digital privacy for a couple of years now, it's actually quite hard to find the concrete harm for the average user. Most users never experience any problems with giving away their data on the internet. And we see that, of course, in our daily dealings with big American internet companies who like our data. We also saw it after the Snowden affair. I mean, the logical conclusion would be to use the internet less, to drop off the social media, because what Snowden, one of the many things that Snowden revealed is that these companies, willingly or unwillingly, were contributing to the surveillance done by the NSA. I mean, there's no clear-cut barrier here. Of course, the NSA would like data from, say, Facebook and Google. It tells us a lot about us. And you would have expected, based on what people were saying, that, okay, you would stop using these services. But that was hardly registerable. I mean, if you go and look at the numbers, there were very few people who actually changed their habits. And last year, Google had a great year. They had a huge surplus, which only goes to show that what people say and what they do is two very different things. And if you are in doubt, just ask the British Labour Party. In 2009, an EU commissioner called Megleva Kuneva said, personal data is the new oil. It's the currency of the internet, which present us, and she's right. Everything that's happened since 2009 has proven her right. It presents us with a paradox, which is this, and we discovered that during the Snowden affair, that Europeans were also being surveyed by the NSA through American companies, which we are using partly because there are no good European alternatives. Now, why are there no good European alternatives? Well, one of the reasons might be that we have such good privacy laws, because these companies, after all, are dealing with personal data. And one thing the EU is very fond of doing is reining in these companies and trying to restrict their use of private data. And again, this presents a paradox for the EU, because most of the growth, a lot of the growth in the IT sector in the coming years will be in the private data business. On the other hand, if we are too strict about protecting our personal data, we might end up driving European customers once more into the arms of American companies who operate under different laws. We might be legislating ourselves out of the next big wave in computing. That's putting it a bit dramatically, but it just shows us that the debate today is far more paradoxical and far more complex than it used to be. When I grew up, it was simple. Surveillance was the Stasi, surveillance was the Eastern Bloc, and non-surveillance was freedom. It's not like that anymore. It's more complicated. So no, I'm not advocating the abolition of privacy laws, by no means, but I'm looking for a wider and more nuanced debate that is based on what people are actually doing today, especially young people. I'm looking for a debate where young people actually participate, because the problem today is that almost everybody who talks about privacy is my age. I mean, it's white males with academic backgrounds over 50. It's not good. We need the young people. So what I'm saying is that, yes, the government probably does need to do something about the internet, but before it does, it needs to think again, long and hard and with an open mind, on how to solve these paradoxes. and it needs to acknowledge that there are no simple solutions anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Eirik Newth. Final panelist, Jarbekk, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Yes, I'm on. Thank you. Well, at least some people care. There are a lot more people here this morning than I would have thought. Some of us are mid-age, something. But I also know that we have a younger audience as well. In fact, to ensure that, I brought my teenage daughter, who has grown up with privacy, learned that it is important, and it's a broad span in your audience, in this audience today. I was afraid that maybe I wouldn't have any points left coming at the end of this very competent panel. But I have some points. I'm glad to hear that, or to see that. First, I would just recap on what is the internet. And the internet is, of course, a lot of things. It has turned into something that is not going away. Some people thought it would go away a couple of years ago. It hasn't. And we're using it for things that nobody really could imagine it would be used for just a few years ago. We're using it for telephone, for communications, we're using it for cars. It's an instrument for many vital functions for our society. We wouldn't really have, or if internet goes down, our society will not function as it does. And it is, unfortunately, rather vulnerable. Lots of the technology is based on old technology. If you go down into the layers, it's not all top-notch, but we're building new services on top of it. This has, in a way, gone so far that we even now have a definition for what is not only traditional warfare, but we have a definition of what is cyber warfare. And why is that? That is, of course, because you're able to hurt a society very much through internet attacks. This is no surprise to you. So then the question is, of course, should the governments do something? And what should they do? Now, internet, as some has mentioned before me, is very much administered through ICANN and other organizations. It's a so-called multi-stake arena, where ICANN and the United States has a big say. Of course, many other countries don't like this, so there is discussions on whether this could be moved to an organization like the UN, for instance, but that isn't easy as well, because the UN today, at least some people may say, it has a certain democratic deficit. So I don't think that is going to change. I think we're stuck with internet as it is in its own fundamentals for a long time. And that leaves the question up to the governments. Will they do something? David said that the government should do less. I don't think that's going to happen. And I think they're going to use my profession to the lawyers to help them in finding some maybe practical way of maneuvering through this very difficult landscape. I think there are two main issues that the governments need to address. There are two problems that are, from time to time, rather acute. One thing is data security. How do you catch malware? This is a topic for the technicians, but it is quite clear that we need to have mechanisms for catching malware coming into Norway or other countries. The other issue is, because we are using internet for, amongst other things, communication, it is quite possible to monitor internet, to monitor the communication, and to find possible terrorist communication. And if you find that, you might find the terrorist and you might prevent attacks. These two issues are addressed in rather different manners. I think that it's not only the governments that need to address this, but in reality, it's very often the companies who address that. And just a small example of that is that a company present here today, Telenor, has a case before the Privacy Appeal Court as we speak. And it's no secret, I can mention it. I know some secrets, but I won't mention them. The case has to do with data security, malware detection, and what Telenor wants to do is to keep certain logs, internet logs, IP logs, not everything, just a small part of it, I won't go into what it is, for 21 days. And the Norwegian DPA, the Data Protection Authority, Datatilsynet, says that 21 days is too short. You have to keep it, you may have it, but you may have it for a couple of hours. Now, the DPA and Telenor didn't come to any agreement on this, so it's now being decided by the Privacy Appeal Court, probably next week, if we're lucky. If you're lucky, maybe. It takes time, there are difficult issues, many things to discuss. But I think it illustrates very good that we have legal framework for in what degree the companies may protect us. And that is really important. If we turn to the more terrorist threats that you can discover through internet. There is just a quite recent example. The Norwegian military had a group called the Expertgruppen, which gave a view just now after Easter. And on page 75 of the report, you will find it says that most of the communication of Norwegians go through cables, and maybe technology has changed so much that there is a need to access and to monitor, in certain cases, what happens. Now, this is a kind of a parallel to the Swedish FRA Act, but it has been surprisingly little debated in the public area or arena, in my opinion. And I think it's interesting to see that question in parallel or in paradox to what the Norwegian police intelligence suggested just before Christmas last year, when she suggested that we might keep and save data published on social media, because it's interesting to see how known terrorists have interacted back in time. And I think that suggestion survived for 3 hours, 4 hours. And then almost all political parties came out and said, that's not feasible. We don't want that. What we put on Facebook and other places is ours, and the government is not going to act on that. Okay. So where am I going? I'm going to the end. I think that we are entering a time where we will have more surveillance. I don't think the governments can avoid going in that direction, unless the world changes substantially, and I'm afraid it won't. I'm very glad to hear, Eirik, that you're saying that you're not finding really changed behavior from people because of surveillance. But I think maybe there is a change between surveillance initiated by Google and by private companies, where you kind of have a feeling that you get a benefit. They're using it to give you nice products. And that might be conceived differently than surveillance, which is done by the government. Because the government has quite large possibility of sanctions towards us as civilians than has a company. And it also has a right or a side to human rights and freedom of speech. It has a right to how stable are our democracies, and what can we trust. I know that Norwegian DPA, Datatilsynet, has a poll showing that a certain, it's not a very big percentage, but a certain percentage of people have altered their habits for Googling or for requesting things on the internet, because it's now apparent that it is traced. I think that we will see a lot of new legislation, and I think that is vital that we don't just act on feelings. I think we need a lot of more research. It's easy to haste. I think it's important that we don't haste, and that we might also enter into time where the laws will have to change more rapidly than they have, because technology and society is changing very, very fast. Tying into something Eirik said on big data, EU is planning new privacy legislation. Most of you know that. And they have a principle which is called purpose limitation. You cannot use personal information for other purposes than what you told the data subject in the first place. And that has been a truth for quite a few years. Now they are actually debating if that is too strict. They are debating if the purpose limitation should be weakened in the view of big data, because the argument goes that the benefits of analyzing big data might be so big that we don't really have to go back to the data subject and ask for a new consent. You should just be able to continue and go ahead with new analysis. And that is a very, very, very big shift in the logic. If that will go through, maybe I doubt it, but I know that it will be very difficult to place the responsibility of balancing what is the better for the society and what is better for the data subject. And I think that if it is true that we will have more surveillance, I also think it is very, very vital that we have trustworthy guardians that guard the guardians. Because if not, we are going to have quite another society in maybe a very short time. Okay, thank you.